So I'm flattered to be here. This is a luminary group, knows a lot more about ethics and organizations and success than I do. But I'll share with you some of what we're doing at the University of Michigan and some of what's occupied my time for the last 15 years or so. So I start out with this because 2 weeks ago I spent a week, and this is now the 7th year I've been spending 4 weeks a year with leaders of the national intelligence agencies, so CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, and all those groups. And I spend about 5 days a year, every year, have been for 20 years, with Army generals. You've been Air Force though, you wouldn't have known the Army Strategic Leadership Program, which I've been teaching in for a long time. So normally 1- and 2-star generals. And it's really interesting to be with those people because they're so current and they're so involved in keeping us all alive. And so we kind of know that we're in an environment, I don't think anybody accurately would predict the next 5 years. Do you know anybody who would, with some assurity, would say, let me tell you what it's going to be like 5 years from now. It's just way too chaotic. And everything from Steve's fraud and, at this very moment, 40% of the people on the planet are online. Can you imagine that? And so, by the way, because everybody's essentially connected, nobody that isn't dangerous anymore, or hardly anybody that's dangerous anymore, has signed the Geneva Convention or has treaties. That is, it's the sort of connected group that we don't even know where they are. That's our major danger. Well, the reason I show you this, and by the way, only 11 countries are not involved in armed conflict. We're in a chaotic environment. Normally, the reason we have ethics is to sort of govern chaos and to keep things under control. And the problem is that when everything is changing, and it is impossible to manage change. You cannot manage change when everything is changing. So think, for example, of an airplane flying along at 600 miles an hour. If you can't find something that doesn't change, like the stars, like the ground, you can't navigate. You remember John Kennedy Jr. flying from New York up to Boston. It got dark, it was cloudy. He lost track of anything that didn't change, flew his plane into the ocean, 125 miles an hour, killed himself and his wife and her sister. So you can't manage change unless you can find something stable. Well, normally ethics, except for people who have testimonies of the gospel, and we know principles and the Savior is our constant. But for the most part, ethics is in fact the means by which organizations create some kind of stability. So the dominant in the academic literature, although not exclusive, focus of ethics in publications is on avoiding harm and adhering to contracts and obeying the law and fulfilling duties and obligations and keeping people from doing wrong things, anti-corruption and so on. That's the reason for ethics, which is fine. The trouble is, ethics isn't stable. That is, it doesn't serve like principles of the gospel serve because of their changing nature. Think of ethics as it relates to civil rights. I think, at least I'm old enough to remember when it was very different. Civil rights to do some things which now are considered completely unethical were just fine then. Somebody this morning was saying that a CNN reporter mentioned that there was a murder in a neighborhood in a big city, and on her Facebook she said, we have a real problem with black-on-black crime. She got fired because it was not clear that it was black on black. Was it you, Brad? So that's, 1975, that would not have been unethical, is now. And so on. Ethical standards have changed dramatically. Our daughter in California is now required to teach, she's a nurse in one of the school districts, to teach that gender is fluid. That would have been unethical earlier. That is, ethics isn't stable. Well, what is stable? What I want to do is suggest to you, think of the line across the top of this slide as representing a deviance continuum. Now, deviance by definition means an aberration from the norm, unexpected, not normal behavior. So we can think of negative deviance, but we can also think of positive deviance. There are several important implications of thinking of deviance on a continuum. One of them is that all organizations exist to eliminate deviance. All organizations exist right here. 1:15 comes along, we come in, we sit down, we organize, we eliminate deviance, otherwise it's chaos, we can't get anything done. So all organizations, by definition, try to be right here. Another implication, there's lots of implications to that, but another implication is we know a lot more about one end of the continuum than the other. So think of physical health. I got the flu, I got diabetes, I got heart disease, I got something. 90% of all medical research focuses on this gap, right? Over here, there is positively deviant physical health. It's Olympic fitness levels, it's 5% body fat for men, 15% body fat for women. Not much research, a little, not much. Psychologically, it's worse. 99% of all psychological research focuses on depression, anxiety, stress, burnout, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, something. Organizationally, a lot more to say about this, but organizationally, you walk into a finance class normally. Other than at BYU and Brad's influence, you walk into a normal ethics class. You get handed a case study. The general assignment is what's wrong, what are the problems, what are the obstacles. Come up with some recommendations and defend yourself. Are we going to be profitable? Are we eliminating conflict? Are people's relationships okay? And that's fine, except most of what we know stops here. Over here, I refer to this positively deviant state in organizations as a virtuous condition. Now look, in the original Greek and Latin, virtuousness simply means the best of the human condition. The highest aspirations we have for ourselves is a virtuous state. When you are at your best, you're in a virtuous condition. So in music, virtuosos, virtuosity is the most inspiring, best performers. If the world was virtuous, no poverty, no war, everybody would be educated. It would be the best we can imagine. That's what virtuousness is. Okay, what I want to suggest is we spend most of our time, in fact, ethics by and large is restricted to the left-hand side of that continuum. The right-hand side is what I want to focus on and want to emphasize that I believe it's one of the differentiators between Wheatley and almost every place else on the planet, including Virginia, the oldest. Fine, Virginia doesn't focus on abundance gaps or virtuousness gaps. Now, let me tell you why that's important. Let me skip that. If you focus on abundance gaps or virtuousness, you unleash something called the heliotropic effect. You know what the heliotropic effect is? You do, you just don't know you do. You put a plant in the window, over time, leans toward the light, right? Which is an example of the heliotropic effect, which is defined as follows. Every living system, everything alive, has a tendency toward positive away from negative, toward light away from dark. See, in nature, the sun is the source of positive energy. It's the life-giving force, photosynthesis and so on. Most accurately defined, the heliotropic effect is every living system is inclined toward that which is life-giving and away from that which is life-depleting. Makes sense. You think over time species are attracted to that which gives life and are repelled or avoid that which endangers or detracts from life. If that's true, if every living system, including people, are inclined toward and flourish in the presence of the positive, and languish or avoid or denigrated by the presence of the negative, has enormous implications for how we rear our children, what kind of incentive systems we have in our organizations, how we train leaders, how we educate our students, and so on. What I want to do is spend just a few minutes, a very few minutes, talking to you about the heliotropic effect and try to prove to you it's correct. And I'm going to show you maybe 1% of the research, a very small amount of research. But I want to convince you that the heliotropic effect exists. And then talk about therefore what. So, this study was done originally at Michigan. It's been done now, replicated multiple times. So a physician puts a drop of liquid at the bottom of your nostril in which there's cold virus, rhinovirus they call it. You breathe in the virus. Some people get sick and some people don't. And the question is, well, how do you predict who gets sick? As it turns out, the temperature at the back of your throat, where your esophagus meets your nasal passages. A half a degree difference in that temperature causes you to succumb to the virus versus be resilient. And your emotional state affects the temperature. Happy, optimistic, positive people get sick significantly less often than depressed, angry, cynical people. But the classic study that illustrates this is called the nun study. It's a study of 678 Catholic nuns living in a convent. Now, this was originally designed as an Alzheimer's disease study. So these women were between the ages of 75 and 104. Some had Alzheimer's disease. But see, they had the same diet, same regimen, same environment. You can control for a lot of factors. There was a side finding that emerged out of that study, and here it is. They found the journals or diaries of 180 of those women when they entered the convent 60 years before. Some women were saying, this is the culmination of my life's dream. I'm so happy to enter the order. This is such a blessing. Some were saying, this is going to be a challenge, going to be a sacrifice, going to be difficult, but I'm committed, I'm going to follow through. Difference? Positive versus what they call vigilance. Then they simply counted the number of nuns alive in each group 60 years later. Now, these numbers aren't precise, but they're very close, and they represent the difference. Of the 90 nuns in the first group, 70 were alive. Of the 90 nuns in the second group, 10 were alive. And at every decade, there was a significant difference in mortality rates. It turns out you live 13 years longer on the average. I won't show you that data. Second study, we've all sort of learned this. Let's assume for a minute, this is a study, let's assume for a minute that I'm interested in having all of you become better bowlers, B-O-W-L-E-R-S. So we're all going to go down to the bowling alley and we're going to bowl 3 games. But here's the challenge. I'm going to give you $1,000 if you can improve your bowling score by 10 pins. But the challenge is you only have 30 days to do it. So we're going to get a baseline. We're going to bowl 3 games. I'm going to film you. Then for you folks, I'm going to show you when you were bowling, but I'm going to show you only when you made strikes and spares, knocked all the pins down. I'm going to show you when you were bowling. I'm going to show you only when you did not make strikes and spares. So square up, work on your approach, try to improve. All right? 30 days later, we come back together. We all go down and bowl 3 more games. Some of you get the money. Who'd get the money? The results occur even if you don't practice, but they're not as statistically significant. Now the question is why? Why do these people bowl better just by watching themselves make strikes? Well, that's easy. We say, well, it's because I'm getting confident and I'm seeing my success. But think about this. First time you went out and played basketball, didn't you mostly miss? Why didn't you learn how to miss? Because most of the data is coming back missing, right? First time on the golf course, went this way, still does, right? When you think about almost anything you do, when you learn, the first thing that happens is you learn a lot of mistakes. Why doesn't that stick? And the answer is heliotropic effect. Inherent in your DNA is a tendency to learn the positive. Otherwise, you wouldn't be this old. You would not have survived. You wouldn't have adapted. So inherent, you don't have to choose this positive. It's inherent in the DNA. It's heliotropic. All human beings have it. Lots more to say about this. Let me show you a couple of others. I used to do this in my classes, and many people do this now all over the country. Let's assume all of you are in my MBA class, and I say to you, you are required students to keep a journal every day in my class. But you are required to write down 3 things every day for which you're grateful. 5 minutes before you go to bed, write down 3 things that happened today for which you're grateful, or the 3 best things that happened to you today. You write down 3 events or 3 problems you faced. So I got a journal group, I got a gratitude journal group. Then all of these are published studies, not mine, but they're all published. After 7 days, I'm going to give all of you, by the way, it's got to happen for a semester you keep in a journal. 7 days later, I'm going to give all of you a flu shot. In 1 week, I'm going to test for the number of antibodies in your system. You are going to be healthier in 7 days than are you. Now look, I'm not asking you to train for a marathon or lose weight or give up chocolate. I'm asking you to put yourself in a virtuous condition once a day. And it's not only gratitude, but it's generosity and it's kindness and a bunch of other virtues that create the same result. And I'll give you a mental acuity task. You have to memorize information. You have to remember information. You have to come up with a sophisticated decision rule with complex data. More mental acuity here. I can affect the way your brain works than here. You're going to be smarter, literally. I'll show you in a minute. And I'll give you, a creativity task. What's that? Well, think of all the things you can use this for. or a brick or a ping pong ball. More ideas here and a broader variety of ideas here. That's mental flexibility here than here. I'm asking you to keep a gratitude journal. This is not very sophisticated. Now, why does that work? Here's why it works. I have a friend at an organization called HeartMath. They study heart rhythms. Here's your heart rhythms when you're upset. Here's your heart rhythm when you're in a gratitude or kindness or virtuous condition. Now you know why after 60 years some people are alive and some people are dead. You simply live longer. And here's a study of what's called coherence. This is, in your body you have rhythms. You got heart rhythms, brain rhythms, muscle twitch rhythms. When everything is perfectly aligned, that's called coherence. And you can measure coherence. The ideal level is 0.1 hertz. All right, here's when you're upset. Here's when you're angry. Here's when you're asleep. Here is when you're in a gratitude or virtuous condition. You are perfect. You cannot get better physically than when you're in this virtuous condition. This is a study. Oh, there's more data. I'll skip that. And I can tell stories about that, but I'll run out of time. Here's a study where we simply ask people to contemplate, ponder, think about a positive, optimistic, or virtuous future versus a neutral or negative future. So you're just going to be thinking about stuff. I'm then going to do a scan of your brain. More areas of your brain are activated in the positive state, and of those activated, they're activated to a greater extent. You are smarter in that positive, virtuous condition than in a neutral or negative condition. And this is a study, just two more. This is a study of what's called vagal tone. So when you put a monitor on your heart, you get a line with a blip. That's vagal tone. You want it to go up, you don't want it flat, right? We can induce significantly improved vagal tone just by inducing a positive emotional and or virtuous condition, which means over time far more long-term well-being, because the vagus nerve goes from the back of your brainstem down around your heart and back, controls your heart rhythms, controls internal organs, amount of inflammation in your body, and so on. You simply do better. And this one I learned about a year ago. So in this study, by the way, in psychology, there are a significant number of psychologists who believe that a person cannot think until you learn language. I don't happen to believe that, but language, they say, structures thinking. Okay, so they take pre-language children. This is a study of children 3 months old to 8 months old. This happens to be one of our grandchildren at 8 months. So that's as old as they get. Okay. The experiment is you simply take a puppet, you put the child on a caregiver's lap, watching a puppet show for maybe 15 or 20 seconds. One puppet starts across a stage, or tries to climb a hill, or tries to open a box. Two other puppets. One helps, that is, facilitates, or one hinders, jumps on the box so you can't open it, puts a block up the hill. Then, after 15 seconds, you bring these two puppets out, put it in front of the child, and the child can simply take which one he or she wants to play with. Now, if they're too young to grab, like a 3-month-old, they simply measure eye movement. Which one does he focus or she focus on? Over 90% of the time, infants overwhelmingly prefer animals that try to help rather than hinder, even when it's not successful. The conclusion of this study is inherent in the human condition is a tendency toward virtuousness. From the time you are 3 months old, maybe before that, but you can't measure anything before that. All right. So, the heliotropic effect, I'm trying to make a point, is inherent in the human condition. It is unleashed. It is fostered, enabled, when you put yourself in a virtuous condition. More than ethics, because ethics is variable. But what about organizations? It's fine, we can have a lot of positive people in a room, does not make for a great organization. So this is my last slide, Brad. And I won't show the rest of them, but my own research for the last 15 years has been asking the question, yeah, but does this really work in organizations? Because they're far more complex. I mean, trying to run IBM is a lot more difficult than having a child or a classroom. behave that way. So my own research has studied a whole bunch of organizations across, from the intelligence agencies and the military to education and healthcare and manufacturing and retail and so on. Financial services has been among the most significant. The conclusion is as follows. If you implement virtuous practices, if you create an abundance culture, I'm calling it an abundance culture, which is really characterized by virtuousness, you will get, and by the way, I've never found any so far, no disconfirming evidence, you will get more money. You'll make more money. Profitability goes up. Productivity goes up. Quality goes up. Fewer mistakes, fewer errors. Innovation, more ideas, more creativity, new product development goes up. Customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, customer retention goes up. And employee engagement, employee retention, employee satisfaction, employee morale goes up. Now, all these studies. This is the one where we took financial services organizations. These are Wall Street firms. You'd say, look, of all the places on the planet that do not care about virtuousness, it's Wall Street. Come on, show me the money, right? If I got $100 million invested in that portfolio, I want to know 15 minutes from now if it's going up or down. We took 40 firms. Simply asked them to implement, some of them took it seriously, some not, implement positive practices. Then we simply, 2 years later, said, are you getting better, are you getting worse? Now let's measure financial performance. I can account for half the variance in financial performance. I don't know anything that accounts for half the variance in financial performance, except for virtuousness. It's not the stock, it's not the environment, it's not the Chinese. And then a whole bunch of other things as well. So that's good enough, and there's a whole bunch of other things too. And by the way, I think the Lord's doing the same thing with us. Look, there's some things that have to be stable and unchangeable, and this is one of them. Thank you, Brad. I'm 1 minute over. No, 1 minute and 45 seconds over.